Well, welcome to an incredible program. We're so excited to have this program. I think it's actually history here at the Commonwealth Club. I'm not sure if we've ever done anything this provocative, but I'll double check. The club has been around for over 120 years. Just some housekeeping items. If you need some fresh air, it is a beautiful night. We are going to have a nice little cute reception after the program. Make sure you stick around. But if you need that fresh air, need a break, you can go ahead and hit rooftop and do that. There are restrooms here on this floor. There are also gender neutral bathrooms on the third floor if you'd like to use single stall rooms. Please silence your phones. We are recording this for broadcast. And what else? Have a kick butt time. To introduce our program tonight is our good friend, very good friend, community leader, fearless leader. She's incredible, and she's the reason why we have a wonderful reception this evening. I'd like to welcome to us all here the Executive Director of San Francisco Pride, Suzanne Ford.
Thank you, Michelle. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Commonwealth Club. I have a great job tonight. I get to introduce someone that needs no introduction. But first, I would like to say this is the kind of programming that Michelle and the Commonwealth Club have made sure that the LGBTQ community is involved in, and that our ideas and our values are being transmitted. And I love Michelle for doing the work. And we do want to remind you that during Pride Week here at the Commonwealth Club on Thursday the 25th, we will have the 4th Annual Human Rights Summit. And it's an all-day seminar. We'll be talking about LGBTQ rights, human rights. We'll be talking about trans issues. And we invite you all. The ticketing will be on sfpride.org very soon. And we invite you to come. So now to my job for the evening. You know, when I saw the description of this evening's program and I saw Rousseau and Peaches Christ, I was like, if you've got those two people in a paragraph, I have to come. So I'm going to bring out Peaches, who needs no introduction. Everyone, Peaches Christ.
Hi, everybody. Oh my gosh, thank you, Suzanne. So I have gotten to the age where if I'm going to read something, I have to wear glasses. And so this is unusual for me because I don't often get asked to appear at places like this, let alone help get to choose the theme. And this was the first theme I pitched, and they said yes. So thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Commonwealth Club. And in the spirit of this evening's conversation, instead of opening, at first I thought, maybe I should do like the Pet Shop Boys, Opportunities, or, you know, that Yeah, Yeah, Yeah song where they keep saying off with their heads. And then I was like, that's not how I feel right now. I'm not feeling like getting in drag and doing lip sync. So I wrote a sermon. And that is not my normal gut instinct. So it's sort of inspired a little bit by a documentary I saw recently called Catch Me in the Good Light. If you haven't seen it, I highly, highly recommend it. I am not a poet at all, but I was inspired by Andrea, who's the subject of the film. And I don't want to tell you what the film's about because I didn't know anything when I went to see it. But in these times when we're looking to connect with humanity, it's one of those documentaries that I think you'll be grateful you watched if you check it out. And so between that and the theme and the world, I sat down and created a little sermon. So forgive me while I try to open this and hold a microphone. But if you're ready, we shall begin. I even thought of adding music or slides, and I said, you know what? No, I'm going to do it raw. I'm going to really try to do it, you know, bareback this thing. Good evening, sinners. Welcome to the Church of Peaches Christ. I was raised Catholic. Imagine that. Very Catholic. Catholic school with nuns and priests. The kind of Catholic where guilt is not an emotion, it's a lifestyle. Every thought, a sin. Every pleasure, a trap. Every Sunday, a reminder that somewhere above the clouds, there was a man with a beard keeping receipts. And as a young queer kid, in a church that said I was broken, I learned something very early. If someone is going to weaponize a name to control you, you take the name back. And that is how Peaches Christ was born. Yes, Peaches Christ, a drag queen named after the Son of God and a fruit cocktail. Because if the church was going to tell me I was going to hell, I figured I might as well run the place. But here's the thing about growing up religious. You hear the stories, you memorize the sermons. I mean, I was all in as a kid. I was a believer. You learn the scripture, and eventually you notice something. And this is something I've been thinking a lot about. The Jesus that I was taught about as a kid was very clear about a few things. He fed the poor. He walked with sex workers and outsiders and people the world had already decided were disposable. And when rich men turned faith into profit, he flipped the tables. Okay? And yet somehow, 2,000 years later, the loudest people screaming the name Christ are the same ones writing tax cuts for billionaires. The same ones blessing private jets while children sleep in cars. The same ones telling the poor that suffering builds character, while the rich build space programs. Now listen, I'm not a theologian. I'm really just up drag queen. I'm sort of a filmmaker. Some people have called me an artist. I don't say that. I'm an aspiring cult leader, maybe. Which frankly puts me in roughly the same credibility bracket as most television evangelists. It is easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God. That's in the Bible. Now listen, I've seen some rich men, and if that verse is true, heaven must be a camel traffic jam. Because the richest people on earth today are not just rich, okay? They are emperors with stock portfolios, kings with tech platforms, oligarchs with Wi-Fi. And they have chosen sides, right? Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos, Tim Cook, Peter Thiel. Even the gay billionaires have decided they would rather sit at the table of kings than stand with the people who fought for their right to exist. Being queer does not give you a hall pass to become a villain. Evil in a Patagonia vest is still evil. And here is the scam. We are told these people are geniuses, visionaries, job creators, but what they actually are landlords of the future. They own the platforms. They own the networks now. They own the infrastructure our lives are run on. And we, what are we now? We're the product. We are the labor. We are the unpaid interns in the algorithm. We build the roads, we fund the schools, we pay the taxes. And companies like Amazon and Walmart, well, they use the infrastructure that we provide like a buffet. Eat everything, pay nothing. Then turn around and shame their own workers for needing food stamps. $1 trillion company whose employees need food stamps. This is not capitalism. This is feudalism with an app. And here in San Francisco, we've watched it happen in real time, right? We've all seen it, we know. A city that once nurtured artists, misfits, queers, dreamers. It's become a playground for venture capitalist vampires. Where a one-bedroom apartment costs more than my Catholic guilt. But every election cycle, we're told the same story, right? Work harder, be patient, trust the system. But the system is not broken. The system is working exactly as designed. Because when billionaires can buy elections, when corporations write the laws, when oligarchs fund the politicians who regulate them, you do not have a democracy. We do not have a democracy. We don't have a democracy here. We have a monarchy with better branding. And if I'm being honest, that realization for me personally has been really painful. Because for most of my life, I believed in the promise of the Democratic Party. I voted. I donated. I knocked on doors. I believed that if we could just work hard enough, we could push things toward justice. But somewhere along the way, the party of the people, they started taking the same checks. Corporate Democrats standing on stages, talking about equality, while cashing the same donations as the billionaires they claim to oppose. That's what I've seen. And at some point, I have to say it out loud, because people aren't. If you take the money, you serve the money. If you protect the system, you become the system. And the truth is, oligarchy does not care which party wins. They don't. The president we have now could be in either party. He doesn't care. Tonight's sermon is called Eat the Rich. Now, before anyone panics, this isn't about violence. Not sure they would taste very good. It is about accountability, because the concentration of wealth we're living through right now is incompatible with civilization. There are 8 billion people on Earth. No one needs $1 billion. $1 billion is not success. $1 billion is a policy failure. Every billionaire is proof that something in the social contract has collapsed. Healthcare, housing, education, labor rights, all sacrificed on the altar of infinite growth. And here's the twist. The richest people in the world, guess what they love? They love quoting the Bible. They love Christmas photo ops, prayer breakfasts, speeches about family values. But if Jesus came back today, can you imagine? He would not be invited to Davos, okay? He would be organizing an Amazon warehouse. He would be flipping tables on Wall Street. He would be standing with us, with workers, with migrants, with queer kids and the poor. And the powerful, what would they do? They would call him dangerous. Just like they did the first time. So what do? Refuse the myth that billionaires are inevitable. That's the conclusion I've come to. Refuse the lie that greed is genius. Refuse the idea that democracy must kneel before wealth. Organize, unionize, tax them, regulate them, and vote like the future depends on it. Because it does. And frankly, what I've determined is we cannot afford billionaires. Not in a civilized society, not in a democracy, not on a planet that is literally on fire. Okay? We just can't. And if the richest people on earth continue to choose power over humanity, then the rest of us must choose each other. Because the real miracle was never wealth. The real miracle has always been people. Workers, neighbors, communities. standing together and refusing to bow. So tonight, from the pulpit of the Church of Peaches Christ, I offer this final scripture. Blessed are the workers. Blessed are the renters. Blessed are the weird, the queer, the broke, the furious. And when we say eat the rich, we are not talking about teeth. We're talking about appetite. An appetite for justice. An appetite for some dignity. An appetite for a world where no one hoards the bread while the rest of us starve. Because if the billionaires insist on treating the world like their private buffet, then maybe it's time the rest of us set the table. And trust me, when the people finally sit down for dinner, the rich will not be on the guest list. They will be the main course. Thank you. Thank you. There were a number, I just want to say there were a number of drafts of this, and many were determined by myself to be too dark. So that was the lightened up version. I mean, the first one had cannibalism and, all sorts of stuff. Really visceral pictures of what we should do to people. And I stepped it back a little bit. All right, well, I'm going to let the program continue, and I will be back in a little bit. But welcome to Eat the Rich.
To kick us off with a fireside chat are our next speakers. We have Shoykot Chakrabarti, who is running for the open congressional seat, and that seat is of Nancy Pelosi's. But just a little bit of background as told by the bio that was submitted to us. Shoykot is a founding engineer from Stripe and still holds about $50 million in equity. And I just, thank you for keeping it honest. But also went on to work as the director of technology for Bernie Sanders, and then, of course, worked on the campaign for Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and now, yes, running for Congress. So Shoykot Chakrabarti, and then moderating the fireside chat is Celso Dule, who is a principal of the Gagency, by the way, is a co-producer of tonight's program. Also a media giant, big speaker, advocate for our LGBTQIA plus community, and a long list of advocacy for us, especially in AI and tech. Let's welcome our next speakers.
Hi, everybody. So Michelle did a little bit of an intro there, but I wanted to kind of dig a little bit deeper, and for people that may not know who you are, to get a little sense of where you came from, because I really think that your story is central to the discussion we're going to be having tonight. You grew up in Fort Worth, Texas.
That's right.
I actually lived in Dallas for a little bit, so I'm familiar with Texas. You're the son of thanks. You're the son of immigrants. You went to Harvard. I have family in Mass. We have so much in common. Then you ended up in Silicon Valley, where you became extraordinarily wealthy. And then you walked away from all that, and you went to progressive politics, which I'm assuming for next to nothing. So tell us about yourself. Tell us who you are and why.
Yeah, and it is working, right? You guys can hear me? All right. Yeah, you pretty much got it, but I think the thing missing from that is probably why I did all of this, right? Because when I first came out to San Francisco, I worked in tech, thinking I'd be using technology to solve some of the big problems facing society. And then I ended up joining this company, Stripe, as a second engineer. And just because I was in the right place at the right time, I ended up making a lot of money. And that was actually a very radicalizing experience for me because I don't come from money. I grew up middle class, going to public schools in Texas. And, my parents grew up very poor in India, especially my dad. He was a refugee because of partition. And do you all know what partition is? I'm actually curious. Most people, I'm always surprised in San Francisco how many people know what partition is, a very educated crowd. But partition was this terrible event where they cut the country up along religious lines. And so, my dad's family had to flee pretty much overnight. And so he grew up with his family of 12 in this tiny one-bedroom apartment, often having no idea where his next meal would come from. My grandfather started a public school in that place, and he ended up teaching a lot of the kind of refugee community that my dad was a part of. And I sort of grew up with those stories of what he did for his society and for his community. And, it's still to this day, like if I go to Calcutta, people on the streets will stop my dad. And this is a massively dense neighborhood, but they'll stop my dad and be like, your dad saved my life, right? And growing up here, I saw my dad, sacrifice my whole childhood. He would save every extra dollar to try to either help our family who was still in poverty in India or to support our immigrant community in Texas. And that sort of shaped my whole morality because my dad saw getting a visa to his country as a lottery ticket. And so, when I came out and made it big at Stripe, like that was so weird because I worked hard, but I worked hard for a couple years, but at the same time, like teachers, nurses, the janitors cleaning our offices, they're working way harder than me every single day. And yet, I'm going to be able to never work again if I want to, and they will never be able to afford a home or a secure retirement. And that to me felt fundamentally broken, just fundamentally broken. And on top of that, just thinking back on my whole family's experience, it's like, how could I not do whatever I can to try to fix this system? Just how could I not do that? And that's why I quit. And it's really cheesy to say this on live, but I literally wrote a list. I was like, I want to work on inequality, poverty, and climate change. I wasn't political at all at the time. I was looking at nonprofit work, and then Bernie Sanders came on the scene and started talking about that in a very compelling way. So I needed to know what that was all about. So I joined the Bernie campaign in 2016 to try to use the skills I had to do what I could to actually tax the rich and fix this broken economy.
So let's just talk about the elephant in the room then, because you kind of touch on this a little bit, but you're worth at least $167 million, just to put it out there. You made that money in Silicon Valley, like you said, at Stripe, in the exact ecosystem that you now critique. And you're running on a platform of economic equality, talking about taxing the wealthy and rebalancing the power. And I'm asking this not to be difficult because I'm genuinely curious. Does that contradiction bother you? Do you find it difficult? And do you think that voters should trust somebody with your net worth to dismantle a system that actually helped you become very comfortable?
No, I don't. I'm okay with the contradiction because if it was possible for me to give all my money away and fix the system, that's what I would do. But I know I can't do that. We have to fix the whole system. And that's why I've been calling for a wealth tax on the richest in our society, including myself, since I've been in politics. I spent the past 10 years. I know, Michelle got a little bit of my background, but it wasn't just that I worked on some of these campaigns. After the Bernie campaign, I started this group, Justice Democrats, to recruit people on a platform of taxing the rich, of fixing this economy to make it work for working people. And importantly, they were challenging not just Republicans, but also corporate Democrats who were keeping this broken status quo intact. And that's how we recruited AOC, and I ended up running her campaign. And then, Peach has kind of talked about the every billionaire is a policy failure. That was actually one of the people I hired in my office at AOC's. When I went to DC as AOC's chief of staff, it was a guy, Dan Riffle. That was his Twitter handle, was every billionaire was a policy failure.
That's funny. I thought you were going to say Peaches.
No. And that's what I came from. Like Ted Cruz screenshot it. And it was like, look at who AOC's hiring. And we were like, yeah, that's who AOC's hiring. But no, like the entire goal here and the thing I've been fighting for the last 10 years is to try to fix the system to be the one that gave my dad the opportunity to do what I think of as what the American dream used to be. Like we had this vision of an American dream, which was you should be able to work hard and then earn enough to support your family on a single income. And that was fine. And now it's twisted. It's a system where you either win the lottery and you can, have it all, or you'll never be able to afford a solid life. And that is fundamentally broken. I think it's not just fairness. I think it's an existential crisis for the country. Like if you look at history, the way this goes is doom. So we have to fix this.
That's a good segue for what I already had prepared, because I kind of wanted to, when I was preparing for this, I wanted to kind of approach it in kind of a spectral kind of way and look at the different class structures and kind of break it down a little bit instead of doing this broad brush kind of approach. So let's talk about a group that doesn't usually get a lot of sympathy, but I think maybe that they should. It's the upper middle class. So it's the $150,000 to $400,000 earners. That's your orthodontist, your tech middle manager, your couple, two income couple that has a house in Sunset District. They did, by all counts and on paper, they did everything right. They went to good schools. They got good jobs. If they were lucky, they bought a house. But still, they are struggling and stressing about money every month. Mm-hmm. when progressives talk about the rich, this group gets a little nervous, right? Because they don't have offshore accounts or fancy loopholes. They paid full freight. And so they're wondering, are we the rich they're talking about? And so that creates a true political consequence, right? Because watching that upper middle class, they've kind of drifted a little bit. I don't think that they're going to go full MAGA hat wearing Republican all the way over there, but it could, split tickets. They could sit out on primaries. They could find themselves listening to media and stuff that they wouldn't have entertained 10 years ago. And I'm wondering if your platform speaks to these people, because I don't think that you can build a coalition without them.
Yeah, I mean, because when I'm talking about a wealth tax on the ultra rich, I'm talking about people with assets over $50 million, right? So that's not speaking to these people. I think the people you're talking about who have done everything right and are still getting priced out. I mean, a lot of people who work in tech are getting priced out. It's the like, if you actually look at the way the income distribution works in this country, it's wild. Like, upper middle class is a lot wealthier than, the bottom 50%. But then, people like me are a lot wealthier than them. And then I'm like a decimal point on Elon Musk's net worth, right? So it's crazy how unequal it is. But the people in the upper middle class, what they're looking for is actual opportunity. And right now, if we have a society where more and more of our economy is starting to just get consolidated and controlled, because this is what it's really about. It's not just the money, it's the power that comes with it. More and more of our economy is being consolidated and controlled by a small group of people. And you see this affordability crisis keep going up and up and up along with that. And that's because of the inequality. The inequality drives that. When a small group of people own all the wealth in society, that means people will make stuff for that small group of people. People stop making affordable goods. And so that's one reason why you're seeing an upper middle class that can't compete, with millionaires coming to San Francisco competing for the same housing.
You've said something that really cuts to the heart of things. I think the people, here's the quote, the people are working more hours to afford less. And I think that's been building for decades. I think most people would agree. I think instinctively would agree. But here's where I want to push on it, because if you're elected into Congress, that's one vote, right? In reality, you're going to be the minority probably for a little while. So forgetting the big picture vision, what's one thing, the most immediate and tangible thing that would change a middle class family's bank account this month, not in 10 years, but now?
So I want to push back on the question a little bit, because this is like the entire premise of why I'm running. The reason I'm running right now is I've been working in insurgent politics for 10 years, and I have never seen a moment of change like what I'm seeing right now. It's not just going to be me. There are people running all across the country who are stepping up to challenge a corporate status quo.
Within the running for office? Running for office,
okay. Yeah. And they're being powered by people who are showing up in the thousands compared to when I did this last time to help their campaigns. I mean, when we did the elections in 2018 with just as Democrats, there was a version of this. Donald Trump had just gotten elected. Democrats were really upset at the party. They're looking for a vision for the future. And that little moment of change is what allowed, AOC and the squad to get elected. What I'm seeing now completely dwarfs that. So I actually do believe there's going to be a chance. I mean, I'm not saying we're going to sweep all of Congress, but there'll be at least a dozen of us, if not a couple dozen of us, who managed to go into Congress. And this time I'm reaching out to them ahead of time to try to build these relationships, build a team of us who are going to go in there and fight. And the way this is going to work in the long run, because in 2026, Trump is still president, so it's going to be very difficult to pass a wealth tax in those conditions. However, there are going to be issues where we can fight, and importantly, we're going to have to fight a Democratic Party that's currently controlled by the ultra-rich and the corporate interests as well. So we're going to have to fight Hakeem Jeffries. We're going to have to exact leverage, and I believe if there's a group of us doing that fight and winning a few of them, especially on issues of anti-corruption, where there is a large bipartisan consensus amongst people, things like banning congressional stock trading, banning the revolving door between Congress and the lobbying industry, we start getting some wins, then you start building political capital. And then you use that political capital to start recruiting more and more people. And you go into 2028 with somebody running for president and hundreds of people running for Congress and a actual vision for not just taxing the rich, but building an economy that will provide high wage work and wealth to the upper middle class, the lower middle class, and everybody else, right?
Sort of sounds like a cohesive Democratic Party.
Exactly. But we're going to have, but the fundamental fight that's going to happen in 2026 is this question of who does a Democratic Party serve? Are we going to serve the corporate interests and the richest, or are we going to actually have a vision for taking control back of our society? Because that's what this is about. We used to have a country where we had goals as a nation. That's what the New Deal was about. We had goals of what we wanted to do, and we used our economy to achieve those goals. And, then in the last, I'd say 40, 50 years, what's happened is we have an economy that's driven by profit alone. That's the only goal. And the nation follows. It's the tail wagging the dog. And that has been completely destructive. That's why people are working longer and longer hours to afford less and less. And the American dream's been shattered. And that's been going on for decades. So I'm running because I think that big vision's possible. I think this moment of change is possible. And frankly, what I'm talking about is a political revolution. This is not a path to a long career in politics, because I'm going in there to challenge leadership. So either it's going to happen, or I won't be in there for very long.
Well, let's talk about this. You have an ambitious list. Let's just kind of go through this list, because this is threading together nicely, I believe. So Medicare for all, universal health care, paid family leave, higher minimum wage, wealth taxes. If anybody's like me, they're going, woohoo, yeah, that sounds awesome. But it also sounds like a lot we've heard before from a lot of different politicians over the years, right? What makes you different? What makes this time different? I mean, it might involve what you just talked about with this coalition, but there's a single mom working 2 jobs in Fresno. And for her, that might sound like a wish list rather than a plan. What would you say to her?
I would say that it's of course, the plan is basically what I just described. But we have to shoot big, because if we do just one of those things, that's not going to fix the fundamental problem in our economy, which is just the entire direction it's going. Like, this is our New Deal moment. And the New Deal wasn't 3 policy priorities that, FDR came in and said, I'll pass these 3 things and it'll be done. It was a whole different vision for society. We can't go back to a pre-Trump status quo, because that's what gave us Donald Trump. And I'd say the people have been voting for this over and over again. I mean, the reason Barack Obama won in 2008 was he stood for bold sweeping economic change. I'd say for a lot of people, not everybody, there was, a lot of people who voted against immigrants and trans rights and gay rights, but a lot of people voted for Trump in 2016 thinking he was standing for bold sweeping economic change. Biden was a reaction to that. Trump was a reaction to that again. That fundamental current in our politics has gone nowhere, because after 4 years of Trump, people are going to be worse off than they were before Trump. Now, are Democrats going to go in there and pitch basically, going back to what we had before, restoring our funding, or are we going to pitch something new? FDR did not pitch going back to the Gilded Age. He pitched a new thing. That's what we have to actually do in this moment.
Yeah, I'm skipping ahead because I actually have that, and I don't want to wait, because I really like that you've touched on that. So you're talking about this idea that it's not ideological, but people are just hungry for change.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
So how do you build a coalition that genuinely reaches somebody like a Trump voter in rural Pennsylvania, but also maybe a tech worker here in San Francisco at the same time? Do they have common ground? Do they want the same things?
They do want the same things. I mean, I think a lot of the things, especially when it comes to just being able to live a life where you can afford to live off 40 hours a week, that is common amongst people. That's why, when Zoran won in New York, there are all these Trump Zoran voters. Same thing with AOC. She did like a bunch of interviews with folks in Queens. There was a bunch of Trump AOC voters. A lot of people who are voting for Trump are just sick of the system, and they want change. And to me, that means, they want to get rid of the corruption they see in DC. So that has to be a central pillar of it. It has to be cross-party. It doesn't matter if the corruption's on the Republican Party side or the Democratic Party side. We have to just get rid of it. They see things like the Epstein files, and they see a lack of accountability. We have to hold everybody in the Epstein files accountable. I don't care what party you are or how rich you are.
Let me push on that just a little bit more, because at some stage, I think that just becomes, that's the hunger, that's the appetite. Change. How does that change? I mean, is it just that they finally decide they want something different, and it's a luck of the draw, and oh yay, now we have stuff we really, really like, and it's really working? Or is it really trying to change that whole pattern and that mindset? Because it seems like it's just eating the tail.
I think you have to use democracy to make people's lives better, or people are going to, authoritarianism is the easier answer if you can't do that. I mean, back when FDR came to power, we had a very powerful far-right movement in this country then. I don't know if people have seen those photos of Madison Square Garden filled with these huge Nazi rallies, right? And the way we defeated that movement was FDR came in with the New Deal and also through the World War II mobilization, used democracy to make people's lives so much better, built the middle class, built our industrial base, built the social safety net. It killed that movement for decades. It was still there. It was always lurking in the background, but it couldn't achieve power again. So that's when I see, an Obama, Trump, Biden, Trump elections, that to me shows that people are open to what the change looks like. They don't care, but they know this isn't cutting it. So the other piece of this is, when we take power, we actually have to have a plan for what we do. And that's what I've been working on at my think tank for the last several years. We have something called a Mission for America, which is a comprehensive detailed plan. I kind of call it like our version of Project 2025, but in reverse, of what do you do on day one to build a clean economy that's going to create prosperity for everybody, take control over AI, which is currently further consolidating wealth and power into the hands of few, and actually build a society that dramatically improves people's lives. And one sort of failure, I'd say, in the Democratic Party is not just that it's controlled by corporate interests, but there's also a failure of imagination. I've talked to a bunch of people there when I was working there. People don't believe that kind of dramatic improvement is possible.
So leaning into that too, dramatic improvement, there is something that kind of bothers me in general, just general political discourse. The truly poor are largely invisible until about 6 weeks outside of an election, right? And then they're all magically rediscovered. I want to ask you, what goes beyond safety nets and assistance programs? Because if we're talking about building something, right? And those things are obviously critical and necessary. But what's an actual vision for helping the bottom build wealth, not just survive, but accumulate wealth, pass it on, generational wealth that they can depend on and give to their families? What's the big difference because there's a big difference between alleviating poverty and eliminating it.
Yeah, I think so. Yes, of course, part of it is a stronger social safety net. But when you look at examples of when countries, including our own country, have dramatically improved the poorest in society, it's often been through these massive transformations of our economy. And in our case, I'd actually say some of this happened during the New Deal, but a lot of it really happened during the World War II mobilization, where we built this whole industrial base. It was for the purpose of war, but as a result of that, a side effect of that was we created a ton of wealth, especially for the working poor. And that's really what ended the Great Depression, got people out of poverty. But the same thing happened all over the world. It happened in Europe after the war, when they were trying to recover from the rubble. It happened in a bunch of Asian countries. If you look at, South Korea's story or Taiwan's story, a lot of these countries just decided they're sick of being poor, and then they decide to build a new economy. And when you look at how these countries have done it, they, including ourselves, it's this whole different mode of operating, a whole different mode of governing that you get into. And at my think tank, we've been calling this mission mode because it is really different from how we operate government today. In mission mode, there's usually a movement or a leader who comes to power and really puts the country on a mission. And you actually actively sort of get civil society to join in on that mission. You use everything you can. If FDR did this with the fireside chats, where he would get political buy-in to what he's trying to do. And then you make comprehensive plans of what you want to do. Not just pass some policies and take your hands off the steering wheel and see what happens. You make plans of where you want to go, and then you have institutions to finance and coordinate those plans. We used to have tons of these all over our society. The biggest by far was one called the Reconstruction Finance Corporation. It's a little bit in the weeds, but you can go read all about it. But every country that has ever done this has gone through that similar mode, and that's basically what we have to get into if we want to actually reverse the decline that we've been seeing in this country.
Admittedly, I have a lot of questions here, but I'm looking at the clock, and so clearly I had a lot to talk to you about. But I'll do my last one because we're about to be finished. So I wanted to make sure that we got to this. So I want to end our conversation with something practical, because I really believe that people come to these kinds of conversations and they feel energized, hopefully, but then they also later kind of feel a little helpless, right? Because it's great, I love it, but what do I do? So I want to ask you this, and I want a real answer, not a campaign answer, but I want a real answer for someone.
Real answers.
I know, okay. But for someone who's completely checked out, now I know a lot of people in this camp, right? But personally, they're checked out. They're working 2 jobs. They can't afford rent. They don't believe that politicians are actually speaking for or to them. What's one concrete thing that they can do before the midterms, and then not vote, but something that they can actually do to make them feel like agents of their own lives in this democracy?
Yeah, I mean, so much of that boils down to what you have available to you and what your skills are. But, I'm going to tell, because I'm a very firm believer that the way any of this, I'm talking about transformational change in the economy, the way that has ever happened has been movements working on the outside with people working with those movements on the inside. I mean, that was how we got out of the Gilded Age with, the progressive era politicians working with the labor movements on the outside and other organizations on the outside. That's how we got the New Deal, where there were these massive marches for Social Security insurance. And that's how we got the Civil Rights Act, right? And I've had my own, small version of this that I saw in Congress. When I went to DC as AOC's chief of staff, I was led the creation of the Green New Deal. And the way we actually did the Green New Deal was, at that time, Democrats had given up on climate action. They tried to pass cap and trade that failed. And we were saying, no, we actually need to go way bigger on climate. And we have to talk about climate as the same job as reversing our economic decline, building tons of high wage industries for people.
I agree.
And we did it by, introducing it in a somewhat not antagonistic way, but we leaned into the fight that the press wanted to talk about at the time, which blew up the Green New Deal in the media. And then through inside-outside organizing, so Sunrise Movement was who we were working with. They were showing up to every presidential town hall, demanding a response to the Green New Deal. And we were working on the inside, pitching these presidential candidates on ideas like public banking, industrial policy, public financing. And that resulted in everybody running for president responding with their own ambitious climate plans that talked about as a big jobs program, including Biden. His became Build Back Better, turned into Inflation Reduction Act, and actually passed and created the largest investment in climate and union jobs in history. So I say all that to say is, there's gonna be a moment where we're gonna see, I believe, we have to see a massive uprising of people, not like a violent uprising, but a massive movement of people that's bigger than what we've seen in decades. And the way to get involved now is what calls to you, because you have to be able to stick to it. In politics, you go through years where nothing happens and you can't get burned out. And so if that means working in government, and that means working for a campaign, and that means joining an organization that speaks to you, that speaks to your skills, that speaks to your time, any of it is helpful, but it's helpful to build up that infrastructure now so that when the moment arises, when we have, 2028 and there's actually a chance to get all this big stuff done, we have that infrastructure ready to do it. And that's why I've been excited to see things like the No Kings rallies and all these, groups trying to actually build that infrastructure up now.
Are you excited about the midterms?
I'm very excited about the midterms because it's, I spent a year in Congress trying my best to fight the establishment of both parties, frankly, and we just didn't have the support back then. It was AOC, it was a squad, there were a few people, and we couldn't get to where we need to go. And I spent, my time at Justice Democrats trying to recruit candidates, talking to people who are running, and the conversations now, when I reach out to these people running, it's completely different. People are interested in what are we gonna do together? And so I think there's a real chance to do something in DC, which is what's exciting to me. I don't want to go there and get nothing done. I don't understand the people who do that, frankly. But I think there's a chance both in 26 and then using this moment to go into 2028. And I mean, the stakes are going to be high. We're headed into World War III and AI is going on. There's all these huge problems. And I think this is going to be our chance to avoid a Mad Max dystopia and try to head towards a completely different vision of the future. So I'm excited to see if we can make that happen.
Here's hoping that's true. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
All right, let's welcome back Peaches Christ, and also adding to the panel to awesome.
Does it matter where I sit?
It doesn't, wherever you're comfortable or can. And adding to our panel, Maggie Takuta Hall, welcome, an Oakland-based author of the best-selling children's book Love in the Library, which tells the story of your grandparents inside the Minidoka Japanese internment camp, and also author of Squad. I love this one, a queer horror graphic novel about werewolf girls who literally devour sexually predatory men.
I wrote that.
You did. Okay, let's check to make sure your mic is on.
Am I on? Can you guys hear me?
Okay.
Check
Awesome.
1, 2. Has anyone optioned the movie rights for that?
Yes.
Oh, damn.
We'll talk more and more about it.
Well, I hope it's good.
Yeah. Well, welcome, and let's bring this all home. I mean, Peaches, you already did that in your monologue, and a couple people did trickle in. We're very sad to have missed it. Do you want to do it again?
No. Be on time. I'm really not a believer in drag time at all.
The only drag queen then who believes in that. But all right, so why don't we just then start with the theme, because yes, you pitched it, you came up with the idea, we loved it, but why is this phrase "eat the rich," the theme, the program, important to you? What does it mean to you? And of course, Maggie, add on. Peaches.
I mean, I think that, first of all, it was so strange. I've seen things in my life now that I never thought would happen, where I get invited to the Commonwealth Club as Peaches Christ. And I always feel like, if I'm doing a show at Davies Symphony Hall, it's my job to book a porn star. If I'm I've done 2 shows at the Royal Albert Hall. Who the would have thought they would ever let me go in and write and direct shows there? So I'm a disruptor. And I think we're at a place now where I've always been afraid to be too political, because I've been used as a tool of the right. Like literally, like I've appeared on Fox News as like, this is what liberals are. This queen calls herself Peaches Christ, and she's a proud Satanist who wants to be a cult leader. And I'm like, it's all true, So it's like, I kind of think my job is to sort of like disrupt from the sidelines. But lately I've been like, you know what? It's 30 years of being Peaches. I feel like the only way forward is to put disruptors into office and to burn everything to the ground and start over. And so as I've kind of watched my frustrations with the church, the government, culture, like corporations, it all comes down for me to money. When I really think about the root of a lot of problems, if not almost all problems for us as humans. So that was why I picked the theme.
I love the phrase "eat the rich," not just because it's fun to say, and not just because I literally wrote a book about girls eating boys that they didn't like. And despite all of that, I feel like I should be really clear that I don't actually condone cannibalism, just to lay all my cards out on the table. But I do feel like where the period of time that we live in now, especially, there is something incredibly visceral about the phrase "eat the rich" that feels accurate and like an exactly correct reflection of how it feels to live under capitalism right now, but reversed, where we are all sort of put through these systems that have absolutely no kindness for us, and we are extruded through them and processed for our most delicate parts, whether that's artistic or technological or whatever strengths we have to offer society. We're pushed through it, and at the end of it, there is no reward. It feels like you're extruded through the system. And so the idea of eating the rich is, to me, just like a fun reversal of how it feels to be the rest of us right now.
Let's talk about that. I mean, what does it feel like to be the rest of us, or particularly the both of you? How have billionaires, millionaires? I mean, what's it like to live in the Bay Area? And as an artist, and as
and a cult leader.
cult leader.
Whatever I am.
But in all seriousness, how has your life changed or has been affected? I mean, Peaches, you lived in San Francisco forever.
I actually was born in D.C. And grew up in Maryland, and then I moved here 30 years ago. I was 7 when I moved. I did that tired joke. No, I'm 52 now, and so San Francisco is obviously where I've chosen to really, build a home and a life and work. And so I did move here in 1996 when there was. It was pre the first tech boom. It was a different time and a different place. And I was drawn here because of the magic I'd read about. I'd actually spent a little time with my idol, John Waters, and he told me about the Cockettes. And all of the stories, I was introduced to the underground cinema scene here while I was in college. So I came here to really, truly find Oz, to reinvent myself. I'd also just seen the PBS Tales of the City. That had happened while I was in college, and I watched every episode. So I moved here for this magical place, and I found it. And I don't think that it's been taken away completely, but I think folks have done their best, you know, and I think that some of the leaders we have had over the last 30 years haven't protected us as well as we could be protected. I don't think they've been fairly taxing the folks that are benefiting from making a lot of money. So I think for me, it's been a struggle where it's like, I still do love San Francisco, but obviously I wish things were a little different. Yeah, and as far as what it's been like lately, I think as a drag performer, never did I think I'd see a time where, you know, when I was growing up, the only performers I saw were, you know, RuPaul in the 90s and my idol Divine, growing up with the Rocky Horror Picture Show, to the point where drag would become so popular, for better or worse, that it would reach, you know, middle America, that friends of mine would be on television and on Broadway and or that I would be able to make a feature film, you know, like that we would be allowed to do those things, to now see how the rich, and I do believe it's the rich, clearly and effectively have gotten us to hate each other. Mm-hmm. And it's been fascinating to see them finance the fear machine. That, you know, these people are groomers. These are the people to be afraid of. This is the person who's, when we all know who's the dangerous ones. I mean, it's not even, you know, subtle. Like, how many drag queens last year were busted for molesting children versus religious leaders? I'm pretty sure it's a pretty dramatic difference. Like, very dramatic, right? But it works, and they're financing the hatred.
There's a really great hashtag, not a drag queen, that Instagram influencer uses every time a new youth minister is busted for child abuse images and the like. It feels good every time. I would say, like, you know, I'm a traditionally published author. The book that you described, Squad, is published by HarperCollins, which is a Murdoch company. It was optioned by Amazon, which, so on the one hand, I spend my creative professional life fighting over nickels from people who could afford to bankroll me for the next 1,000 years to come up with the most insane shit I could possibly conceptualize. And instead, they're sending me a check every once in a while for not making my book into a show, which is fun. I'll take his money. But, you know, there's that aspect of it where it's like, well, if you want to operate within this system, you have to be willing to work under the auspices of these people whose opinions, entire worldview, and effect on the world makes you feel sick to your stomach. So there's that. But I will say also, to make it worse, I'm also the president of a group called Authors Against Book Bans, which fights book bans across the country. And the overall effect of billionaires in that space is so negative and so violent, for lack of a better term. Like, we all know that Texas has some of the most extreme book ban policies in the country. They are all bankrolled basically by one billionaire named Tim Dunn. He holds really extreme beliefs about gender, about women, about LGBTQ issues, about race. And he's also one of those people who thinks that the end is nigh and that, you know, we should be accelerating it so that he can meet Jesus sooner. And this is somebody who is basically dictating what education in the entire country looks like, because what happens in Texas ends up spreading to the rest of the country. It is also where textbooks for the entire country are sold first, and then they are sold to the rest of the country. So if they can't sell in Texas, they don't get to sell anywhere else. So that's one guy with insane opinions having a completely outsized effect on the entire country and what all of our children are going to be allowed to read by our government. And not only that, I'm sorry, I'm a constant bummer, and I won't stop for the rest of the night.
I wonder if people are like, we're going to go to the Peaches Christ show.
It's going to be so fun.
They're sitting here going like, well, that guy left.
And
yeah, so.
It's like, surprise, she's here with the biggest bisexual bummer you've ever met in your life. There's also all of these tech firms now that are, again, bankrolled by billionaires that are screening books for school districts and for sort of book banning extremists for which ones should be removed from classrooms. There are platforms like Rated Books where then They have illegally uploaded all of works by people like me, including books like Squad, which is banned everywhere, as you might have imagined. And instead of reading the books, they just say, does this have anything harmful to minors? And anything LGBTQ plus is going to be rolled up in that. Anything with what they call critical race theory, which I would just call talking about American history honestly, is going to be wound up in that. And it's a real bummer because critical race theory is actually a real term created by the law professor, Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw, to describe systemic racism. And it's been co-opted by the right to just mean like, black people have opinions and we don't like it, which is insane. And so we are watching these billionaires do their best to defund all of our public institutions of learning and then go beyond that and use algorithmic prejudice to further limit what information, especially young people, have access to. And I think we should all be deeply troubled by it.
Thank you. Yeah. There's so much more to say. By the way, we will have a volunteer go around with a microphone. So if any of you in the audience would like to ask our speakers a question, that's coming up in a little bit. So there's an extra seat, and that wasn't on purpose. We really did try very hard to include a billionaire, and
And for some reason, we couldn't find one that wanted to attend this.
well, I mean, we didn't stop there. We couldn't get the billionaire to accept. Then we went to, multimillionaires. So we really tried very, very, very hard. And at some point I was like, was it something I said or was it the graphic? But
It might be this.
So, I mean, let's start with that. Why do you think, maybe some of the folks that we asked to be on this panel, why do you think they declined to come? I mean, I can offer you some responses. Some, simply said, they just couldn't make it, which is always the
A lie.
very standard. Yeah, I'm not coming. But then there were some who felt very strongly about not participating. Like, it's a hard no.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the people that I recommended is Mark Cuban, because I know Mark, and Mark has, he produced my TV show way back on his channel and helped distribute All About Evil, the film I made. And I honestly believe that Mark would have attended based on the relationship we've had, and he would have been interesting. I actually really wish he could have been here because I think he would have offered a few things. I think Mark, in some ways, is someone that I'm not going to defend any billionaires because I stand by my sermon. But I will say that there are degrees of evil. And I love what he's doing with the pharmaceutical industry and the fact that he's created this corporation where you can buy drugs now that are so much cheaper. And I've actually had to go from my Kaiser pharmacy to his pharmacy because I can get something for $10 at the Mark Cuban pharmacy that I can't afford at Kaiser with insurance. So, that is extraordinary because that could actually, him creating market competition for an industry that is just us all unnecessarily. I mean, go to Mexico, go anywhere else. I wish Mark had come because I think he would have been interesting to talk about the things he's doing.
By the way, he did respond and a few
good.
times, and he really felt bad that he couldn't make it. He says hi.
Oh, nice.
And next time you ask, he'll try to make it.
Okay.
And just to put an exclamation mark to what you said about Mark Cuban, he's not on the Epstein list.
Right, exactly, yeah.
What a low fucking bar. Jesus Christ. God damn.
I know.
All right.
That's where we're
So
at.
he didn't go to Pedophilia Island. Neither did any of us. You don't see us bragging. Sorry. I wasn't surprised at all that we couldn't get a billionaire to show up because if I had unfathomable power, I too would not make myself available for public comment. That sounds like a joke, but I'm being dead serious. Like, one of the greatest privileges of being that rich is insulating yourself with people who agree with you all the time. And that would be really relaxing. And there is a small, deeply small part of myself that thinks that sounds really nice. But then I remember that all of those people operate in the world like they have undiagnosed personality disorders. And I completely understand. I was shocked that you guys were trying, and I was shocked that for a period of time we had somebody who seemed like he might come.
Yeah.
And I researched that person, and I was really excited to ask him about the private prisons he's invested in that are now being used for ICE detention centers. And it was when I was doing that research that I was like, there's no way one of them is coming.
Well,
I'm always a bummer. Sorry.
a couple of them are running for office, and one in particular, for governor of California. I mean, I can't even imagine, like, what are you thinking in terms of I'm going to be able to govern an entire state of people, or working class people. But at the same time, as I was researching the billionaire's tax proposal, which I assume that was one of the things they probably didn't want to talk about, right? It would be the 5% wealth tax, a one-time wealth tax, by the way, on your entire net worth, not your annual income, which could be paid in installments. By the way, somebody really thought about this, but they're so scared of that a few of them have run off to Miami or Florida, really, to go buy up some property and not talk about this. I'm going to go back to that though. Like, I mean, should they hold office or? I know the answer to that.
I mean, I think that's kind of like with the sermon, it was kind of like I've gotten to the point where I feel really betrayed. I was raised by a mother who worked for Senator Birch Bayh. And if you know who that was, very progressive, very much the Mr. Smith Goes to Washington type tale back at a time when that still existed. And so I grew up with a mother who believed in the system and helped get legislation passed that protected women that had never existed, in the 60s. And so I believed in being a Democrat and the power of voting, and I don't anymore. I am ready to vote, for anyone that will not take the money, that doesn't have the money, that, isn't, beholden to some other person with money. Because right now I feel like, and I think with my mother, I think she experienced that stuff at a time where it still was reasonable to believe that those ideals existed. But for me now, the ship has sailed. And so, no, I'm not going to vote for anyone that takes the money or has the money.
In a perfect world, I wouldn't actually have a problem with it. It's that we don't live in a perfect world. And I just don't understand the absolute gall of a billionaire running for office telling you to donate to their campaign makes me want to make like Jesus and flip a table. I can't countenance it. I can't respect it. I can't in any way endorse it. And then I look at somebody like J.B. Pritzker in Illinois, who is a billionaire, and I would argue is running that state pretty well. And my feeling is, if you want to prove to me that billionaires deserve to hold office, that's fine. I'm willing to entertain that notion. I think he should bankroll his entire campaign for president. I think he should pay for that entirely out of pocket. He shouldn't ask donors for a cent, because if he really believes everything he says, I would like him to put his money where his mouth is. But he didn't. That's not how he ran for governor. And so even the ones who are like, okay, I think you can make a reasonable argument that J.B. Pritzker is a good billionaire. Maybe that could happen. Is he still a policy failure? I agree. Yes. But could he have a potentially outsized positive impact on the world to make up for the detriment of every policy failure and exploitation that it required for him to get to that point? Maybe. But I just don't see it going that way because it never has.
Right. So there are officially 200 billionaires in California.
That seems like too many.
No,
Let's eat like 7 of them.
I thought there was maybe 30 or 50 billionaires in the state total, but apparently there's 200 billionaires. So if this wealth tax passes, the money is supposed to go to public education, social services, healthcare. It's not like it's just going to go to, nothing. It's going to go for something. But I wanted to ask you about this idea where, you know, folks who support billionaires or are in opposition of this wealth tax here in California basically say, you know, it's just unfair and it's quite crazy that you would want to tax somebody who's worked so hard and you know is now successful and is where you I know you have a lot to say.
I'm just sitting here then I'm like, well then why the f- am I taxed? You know, like why am I paying taxes? You know, it's kind of crazy. It's like I actually, you know, use the money to pay artists and, you know, to continue to contribute hopefully to that's negotiable. But culturally, I might, you know, contribute a little bit. But it's sort of like, I don't get why people defend them.
Yeah.
I mean, they'd still be so rich, you know, it's wild.
Well, I don't know why
can't
they make it out to be that which they're winning across the country and in you know, campaigns and everything because they're focused on this narrative that Democratic socialists are crazy. Like it's crazy to think that you would do that. It's crazy that you would want to give the money away to the poor or the sick or the ill or elderly or children. Go ahead, Maggie. I know you have a lot to say about this.
I would just say fascism never fucking makes sense. And the argument's never supposed to make sense. We're supposed to spend out our time arguing on the merits of their argument. There is no good merits on that argument. You look into any kind of data about how public spending works, the more we invest in our children, the more we invest in healthcare, the more we invest in housing, the less crime we will have, the more robust our economy will become. Like the data is there. And like, I think we are suffering from constantly spinning out on how do we create the best counter argument against this shit that doesn't make any fucking sense. And if I had the answer of like, well, then we just do X, Y, and Z, I would simply run for office instead of holding a mic at the Commonwealth Club. And so I don't know what the easy answer is, but I've read enough about fascism at this point to understand that the Billionaire Project and the current unconsolidated authoritarian power at the helm of our government may not have the exact goals in mind, but they are sure working to accelerate one another in a way that we should be very quick to nip in the bud while we still can.
I'm going to take your questions. Actually, I don't have a volunteer. Do I have a volunteer? Because I'll run around. Okay, we got Dan. Thank you, Dan.
Thanks, Dan.
Yeah. All right. Let's keep your questions brief, and then please direct it to one of our speakers, just so we can make time for everyone else who has a question. We got a question right here in the front after you.
Hi there. I guess this question or suggestion is more directed at SciCat, but one of the things, and this kind of goes to your point about the wealth tax. I mean, I'm a homeowner. I have been for 20 years. I pay tax every year on my property, whether I'm working or not, whether I'm making money or not. And I look at this as a fairness issue. Why should somebody who has hundreds of millions of dollars not pay like 1% a year? They'll make, instead of making 8% on their investments, they'll make 7%. They'll still be getting rich for fogging a mirror.
It's almost like that argument doesn't make any sense and isn't based in any kind of reality that we actually live in.
The other question I have for them is, what do you see being the end game here? Like, how is this going to play out? Right now, we are living in a city where friends of mine whose last option was to drive for Uber or to do delivery because they could no longer get jobs because they had been replaced by the tech companies that, you know, hired them, used their creativity, and then kicked them to the curb. They are now paying rent in San Francisco, you know, hustling. Maybe they're performers, artists, tech people, programmers, whatever. And those jobs are now being replaced by robotic cars. So, okay, where does this go? Well, and at what point do I not have enough money to order from Amazon or to, you know, pay for Facebook advertising? Like, at what point do they just milk us all so dry that we can't function?
Well, at that point, I like to think that they will be immortal and flying on a dick-shaped rocket ship.
I think that's what they think.
Yeah.
Isn't there a building behind us in this shape already?
Yeah. Wasn't that enough?
We got another question.
Hi, my name's Kenny. I'll direct my question to Peaches, but let's see. We live in the Bay Area, and the worst of these billionaires are really from here, like Peter, or have lived here. Peter Thiel, Curtis Yarvin. These people, they openly talk about like getting rid of democracy and building capitalist, fiefdoms or something. And like, I feel like that seems so, like there should be something that we should be able to do about that, and what would you have happened to people like Peter Thiel, I guess?
I mean, one thing that I think is reasonable is we know what they're going to do. They're going to continue enjoying California, and they're going to set up a residency somewhere else, right? They're going to find a way around the system so they still get to come to all of our theater and go to our music and eat at our restaurants and enjoy the beauty of the city and enjoy the city with the tax dollars we pay for, to create an infrastructure. Not Twitter. They didn't pay taxes, so it's like, at some point, I think we should say, oh, right, you're moving to set up residency in California. You're actually just not, or in Florida to, avoid paying taxes in California. I say they're not allowed to come back. Like, they're just like, set up a border patrol. Like, you don't get to enjoy California, motherfucker. Like, no. Because, they will do that, right? Like, they're not really moving to Florida. Give me a break. We know it, right? They love it too much here. But they are fine raping us dry. And so let's fight back and hold our politicians accountable when this sort of stuff happens. I don't know. I mean, it does feel almost defeatist sometimes. But I'm still kind of like, well, I'm happy to, there's Vinsanto. She's good at lighting things on fire. So it's like, someone's got to, start burning to the ground. So I'm kind of at that point now where I'm like, what at what point do we, have a real revolution? Like, that's where my mind is.
Hi, this question is for Maggie. I wondered if you could speak about your experience with Scholastic and your book, and how Scholastic pushed back or tried to prevent you from talking honestly about your grandparents' experience. Can you do that?
Yeah, no problem. For like 3 months of my life, it was my full-time job. So at this point, I'm like one of those little toys you pull the string on. So I wrote a book called Love in the Library that's about my maternal grandparents who met in a Japanese American incarceration camp during World War II. I wrote it as a picture book on purpose because I wanted our youngest readers to have access to a story about state-sanctioned racism, a path in that was like paved with our humanity. And I wrote an author's note to contextualize it. And in that author's note, I was really careful to say that this was not an isolated moment in American history, and it happened because we have a tradition of racism. It was published by a smaller press called Candlewick that publishes a lot of probably your favorite children's books. They do like very high quality, lower volume per year, and they treated it so well, and I'm so grateful for them. And I got a licensing offer from the children's book giant Scholastic, who has a wing of their company. They have their own publishing wing, and then they also have a wing of their company that sells directly into schools. It's kind of where the rubber meets the road for capitalism for them. They can publish all their interesting books through their editorial, but then they're very mercenary on the education side to just make sure whatever they're buying can sell. And they made me a licensing offer on Love in the Library, which would have been great because I wrote that book to be used in classrooms. It was exactly what I wanted for it. But there was a caveat with my offer, which was that I had to remove the entire paragraph talking about how this wasn't an isolated moment in American history from the book, and I wasn't allowed to use the word racism in the book altogether. The people who laughed out loud, correct, that's the right response, because you cannot talk about Japanese American incarceration without using the word racism. I went back and I said, is my offer contingent on this? And they said, absolutely. And they gave me a high-res PDF of it, of what they wanted me to do, which was a bad choice because I decided to say no and say no publicly. And I was expecting it to be a smaller discussion within the Kidlit community of just like what kind of edits are appropriate to ask for and which ones are not. And I wanted to embolden other creators to maybe say no to stuff like this because I knew this was happening a lot. But instead, it became kind of like a national news item for a moment because we all knew it was happening, but Scholastic was the only publisher stupid enough to send a high-res PDF with red line edits, exactly exemplifying the way that they were capitulating to book banners before the fact. Because the reasoning that they gave me was that they were worried it wasn't going to sell in places where book bans were happening, which is a stupid argument, not just because it's offensive, but just economically it doesn't make any sense, because the people who would ban books were already banning books about Japanese American incarceration. It didn't matter how much I sanded down that story. Unless you removed every illustration that showed a barbed wire fence or a guard tower in that book, it wasn't going to sell in those places anyway. And that is ultimately how I got involved in the book ban fight, was because I did that. I went and spoke in Idaho about telling American history honestly. I keynoted their Idaho Library Association that year, and I gave I'm proud of this speech. Everyone thinks I'm being really self-deprecating when I tell this story, and I'm not. I'm proud of that speech. But at the end, everyone was like standing up and crying, and I was like, oh, something else is going on here. Like, it's a fine speech. I'd given it a lot, but that was a lot. And so I started talking to the librarians about what they were going through, and they were getting death threats. They were getting harassed. One woman had been followed home from the library. Another had had a threatening note slipped into her mailbox with no postage on it. This isn't an Idaho story, but in Arkansas, another librarian got dead animals put on her porch, all because of this false lie that librarians were spreading filth to children in the libraries for disseminating books like mine. And I told myself I'd be damned if I let them fight alone. And that's how I ended up on this path, and that's also how Authors Against Book Bans got formed.
We'll take a couple more questions if you have them. We got one here.
Hi, Suzanne again. I'm a member of the, not billionaires, but the other group of people that cause the most problems in this country, trans people. I'm sure you're all aware of that. We're very powerful, very powerful. I'm from Kentucky, and I'm from very working class background. And when I go home, it's so painful for me to be around working class people that have supported these billionaires and this administration. And I lay awake at night thinking, what magic words can I say that will convince them that we're not the enemy? And both of you answer this. Do you have it? I mean, is it possible? Are we ever going to break through to working class people in this country again? Or has it ever been? I mean, I agree with you. It's really if you read A People's History of America, it's been going on for a long time, this story of pitting working class people against each other and elites running this country. But is there any hope? What is that messaging?
One thing that I've noticed in the time that I've done this, drag, whatever, is that the more I travel, and the more I travel internationally, what we're seeing in this country is playing out in a lot of places. And so the commonality that I see, being in a binational marriage and watching and going to Turkey often and looking at Erdogan and the way that that country is using religion to divide it down the middle and to get these people afraid of these people and these sort of playbooks that they're using, my hope is that this is so awful now that maybe we'll hit a rock bottom that's so bad that people will look over at us. There's this movie Pride, I don't know if you've ever seen it, about the Scottish, I forget, anyway, it was a real story in the 80s where, what was the industry? I don't remember. Miners, that's right. And they rejected the queer people's help. And then over time realized, wait, we're stronger with them than without them. And I hope that we're getting to that place. Like, there's a point where I'm like, okay, you hate me because I do drag. I'm okay with that. You believe that? If you will help me fight them, we can do it together. Because I don't care anymore. I don't want to change your mind. I just want to get rid of the billionaires. And, I really am kind of at the point now where I hope that the working class folks start to see it. Because they've elected this. And now, what do they have to show for it? None of the promises I don't even think they like what they're seeing in terms of, the way that immigration is being dealt with, for example. I don't know. We'll see. I have hope, though, that it's so bad that maybe we'll win some of them over.
I always say that I'm not a peddler of hope because I genuinely believe that hope should be internal, not external. Like, we shouldn't be looking around the world for evidence that we should have it. There's a really great Nick Cave quote that hope is a warrior emotion. And that meaning it's the refusal to stand aside when you know that something wrong is happening. It's a refusal to let go of what you know is sacred. And so I don't look around the world and look for hope. I force myself to practice it as a daily discipline every day because I have to believe that there is something better than what we have right now. And I do genuinely believe that, especially for transgender rights, that while we are on the one hand teetering into what I genuinely fear could be a transgender genocide in this country, we also are seeing more and more people understand what it is that's happening in a way that we didn't previously. And it is incumbent upon all of us to take personal responsibility, especially as cis people, to take personal responsibility for that and to not be the one looking for hope from other people, and especially not looking for hope from transgender people, but creating the reason that they should have hope.
Maggie for president. I think there is another question we can take here from the audience.
Hi, I work for the union that's put the wealth tax on the ballot.
Thank you for your work. We love you.
Thank you. Well, and thank you for the thoughtful conversation about it. It's so great to hear people talk about it. And if anyone hasn't signed it yet and you would like to, please come see us afterwards. If you ignored us or were rude to us before, I promise I won't remember. But I wanted to ask you all something that I'm struggling with right now, which is how do we inoculate our communities, our friends, our families against what is inevitably going to happen when the billionaires start spending a lot of money making arguments against a bill like this? How do we get the message out now? How do we talk to people so that when that happens, they can see it for what it is, and so we can actually get this thing passed?
I think, unfortunately, we're back in square one of you have to have conversations with everyone you personally know, which is nobody's favorite answer to any question. I think we're all looking for the thing that scales, the place where we can just give some money and they will take care of it for us and they will have all the answers. And if those places existed, we wouldn't be in this nightmare. And unfortunately, it is the crushing work of talking, in my case, to your boomer dad about why you would never vote for Gavin Newsom for president because he's standing in the way of a bill like this, and that is everything that you need to know about him. And because he has thrown trans people under the bus the first opportunity that he got for political expedience. And I think I'm getting him. And it's taken 6 conversations, but I think I'm getting there. And unfortunately, I think that's where we are, where it's in the place of online has worked against us in so many ways. And one of the most effective things that it has done is silo us into our opinions. And that is so dangerous because we lose the muscle that it requires to just talk like a normal human being to another human being about things that we disagree with without losing our minds. And again, I love being surrounded by people who agree with everything I say and applaud everything that I ever think and tell me I'm smart and pretty. But that's not helpful. And so unfortunately, we all, that personal responsibility I was talking about a second ago, that's kind of what I mean is we all have to pull up our pants and just have an argument with somebody again and again and again. And that isn't scalable, and that is exhausting, and it is crushing. And there are a lot of people that I look at right in their faces and I just give up on them in real time. And so I'm not pretending I know exactly how to do it every single time, but it is what it's going to require.
I love your answer. I totally agree with everything you said. And it reminds me of a pre-internet world that I got to grow up in, where as a young queer person who was just starting to dabble in drag in the early 90s, and came out, I was invited to attend Queer Nation and ACT UP meetings, and remembering the debates, the hours that were spent before an action was decided upon, the arguing that would happen, and that we could leave the room and still respect each other. I was actually just sitting in the corner watching as really smart people went at each other. But because their goal was the same, you could have those kind of arguments. And I've watched as the internet, I feel like young people missed out in some ways on that process. And I think what's been nice lately, I guess I do return to hope a little bit, is that I decided to get more involved personally. But what I've noticed is I'm not alone. I've noticed other friends of mine, and actually, I have some friends that are, I've been friends with forever, drag performers who are well known in the community, and having arguments with them. It's new for me, and to also have those arguments, specifically, anytime I've shared anything from Shoykot, the responses I get can be kind of intense. I mean, it's one thing to get death threats from Christians. I don't care. I mean, sure, sometimes it gets a little scary. I've had people threaten me in person. I've had people show up where they say they're going to show up to confront me. I've had to have security at certain events. Luckily, not yet in San Francisco, but there was a time when a certain institution here had me booked, and they said they were going to have metal detectors because I was there. So there is this, even in San Francisco, because I'm Peaches Christ and I open my mouth. That's a door that I opened years ago that I cannot shut now. I can't. I had a friend say that they were going to scrub their Instagram account. I was like, well, lucky for you. I'm never going back in the closet ever. If I get sent to a camp, I get sent to a camp. I don't have the choice to hide. And so right now, I feel compelled to be okay with people not liking me. Yeah. And that is a big thing for me, because most of us as entertainers, even when we're disruptors, we at least have an audience that we want to like us. And sometimes lately, I've really pissed people off and they let me know. And I've had arguments with friends that I've known for decades about who to support for Congress. And it's only going to kind of get nastier, I think. But if I just don't say anything and I just sit on the sidelines, I don't know that I'd feel very good about myself. I need to do something. And I hope that other people are feeling that way.
Yeah. I mean, courage doesn't exist without risk, right? Like if you're ever doing something brave, it's not brave unless you're actually risking something. And I think because America is so emotionally dishonest about the things that make us uncomfortable, we are also really uncomfortable with being brave.
I want to actually start wearing the American flag everywhere. I feel like that would be really transgressive. Like, I'm Peaches Christ, and I'm a proud American. I'm a patriot who believes in freedom of speech.
Yes.
The separation of church and state.
The way I would throw all my dollars
I love
at
America.
I'm sensing a part 2
yes.
coming up, and I hope that you all have enjoyed this conversation. The last real question that I had, and we don't have a lot of time, we really probably only have 30 seconds left before we all go up and plan a revolution up on the rooftop. Drink first, then revolution, okay? It's so in every movie that this phrase has been adapted in, modern contemporary Gen Z movies like Parasite and a few others, and I want to channel some of Chris Knight, who's part of the Gagency and a co-producer, in which he says in all of these movies, though, the protagonist does fight back. I mean, we may not eat
we don't condone cannibalism.
No, but what are some ways in which we participate in a revolution and fight back? I mean, at some point, where does this all end? We're just probably going to have to stop consuming everything that they own.
Divesting is the number one thing that you can do absolutely risk-free.
I agree. For the short answer, I would say look at Target. The moment he said DEI doesn't matter, and they came out and said, yay, we'll get rid of all of our black vendors, and we're not going to care about DEI anymore. And Costco came out and doubled down and said, we're going to raise our hourly rate of pay, and we're going to stay consistent to DEI. And Target's, effect financially was so dire that they're desperately trying to turn it around. Their stockholders are enraged. So we do have power.
Yeah.
We do. And we have to remember it. And I mean, even if it means, does that mean I'm done? Even if it means sacrificing seeing some of our favorite entertainment or shopping at our most comfortable places, at least we know we have that.
Yeah. I mean, if you didn't hear anything else I say today, please divest from Amazon. It's hard.
Let's begin
It's
the
really
revolution.
hard, yeah.
Everyone, big, huge round of applause for Peaches
Thank you.
Price, Maggie Takuda Hall, Shoykat Chakrabarti, and Celso Dule. If you guys both want to come out, are they still here? And maybe just take a bow with us. That would be great. So we do have a nice reception up at the rooftop. We'll see you there. Thank you, San Francisco Pride, for always supporting these important conversations. And of course, the Commonwealth Club, World Affairs of California, and the Gagency. I'm Michelle Meow. We'll see you next time. For more events, head to commonwealthclub.org/MMS.